The United States has taken lethal, targeted action against al-Qaeda and its associated forces. In the intelligence gathered at bin Laden's compound, we found that he wrote, "We could lose the reserves to enemies' airstrikes." Simply put, these strikes have saved lives. Moreover, America's actions are legal.
So last week, President Obama vowed to curb some of the better-known and more controversial tactics of a 12-year US campaign to contain terrorism. But this doesn't mean the so-called war on terror is over. The Wall Street Journal's Washington Bureau Chief, Jerry Seib, joins us to discuss what will change and what won't as the government changes course in the fight against terrorists. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning.
So, Jerry, to start off with, please give our viewers a reminder of the steps that the President laid out in his speech last week that actually would be changing.
Well, what he said in the speech essentially was it's time to turn a corner. We need to not end the war on terror necessarily, but enter a new phase. And I think a lot of people heard end the war on terror. That's not really right. He did say some important things will change. There are some new rules regarding those drone strikes that the president can pretty much order up at will. He's kind of restraining himself and his successors by imposing new standards that are required to be met before a drone can be sent out to attack a suspected militant. He had called again for closing the Guantanamo Bay detention center. And he talked a little bit about setting up some kind of judicial or legislative body that would oversee some of the aspects of war on terror. So those things are significant changes, but some things that aren't changing got a little less attention. You know, for starters, the rules of engagement in Afghanistan and along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, where there are still 60,000 American troops in the Afghan theater, those are not going to change. You know, the president's going to feel free to use drones and to let the CIA as well as the Pentagon use those to protect troops. So that's not changing. I think more importantly, there have been some structural changes over the last 12 years since 9/11 that are not going to change at all. You know, there's a giant new intelligence apparatus built up to combat terrorism. There's a counterterrorism center that's been a sprawling complex out in suburban Washington. That's huge. It's not going anywhere. And the FBI has changed the way it does its business. It says now our top business is not catching bank robbers or kidnappers. Our top business is stopping terrorism. So these are structural changes in the way the government works and the way Americans think about terrorism, and those aren't changing.
You know, in years past, Jerry, we used to talk about the military-industrial complex as a kind of a defining force in American politics. Is it fair to talk these days perhaps about an anti-terrorism industrial complex? I mean, how deeply and how pervasive is this bureaucracy that's been created, and how much of an impact does it have on government and on our lives?
What's a big change in the way the government works that's been occurring slowly? Some of it started in a rush right after 9/11. Other parts of it are consolidating. The Department of Homeland Security, for example, didn't exist. It was created. It now has 240,000 government employees. These are people who tend to, would have been in other disparate agencies by and large, but now they've been pulled together into one agency whose sole mission is to protect the homeland, to protect the safety of the United States, whether that's border security or TSA inspectors at the airports that we all travel through, or whether it's looking abroad, trying to figure out who can get a visa and who can't get a visa. That's an entire government bureaucracy that's giant and is not going away at all. And I also think it's worth noting that the function of the U.S. intelligence services has changed. You know, the CIA pretty much became a paramilitary operator in the war on terrorism. That's going to be pulled back a little bit. But that doesn't change the fact that the traditional threats the CIA spent its time worrying about and the kind of collection of intelligence it focused on, those things have been pushed aside a little bit. It also is primarily an anti-terrorism organization in many parts.
Right, and Jerry, in the opener to your very fine column, you refer to the war on terror as operating in this kind of grey area, and it struck me when we think back at the Boston Marathon incident, and of course this rather ugly scene in London last week, that the terrorist attack itself, the terrorist challenge itself has changed. These are locals, and domestic terrorists, if you like, who have been, you know, radicalized locally. Is the enemy changing as well in terms of where these governments are going to fight against these terrorist threats?
It certainly has changed. It's changed abroad. It's changed in the way it reaches home, as you suggest. You know, the idea that somebody ought to be finding attackers like the Boston Marathon bombers before they attack, that's pretty much an FBI job. That's not a CIA job. It's not a military job. And that's certainly a significant change in American life. That's why the FBI says that's our most important job. But you know, as the president noted in the speech, the terrorist threat abroad has changed too. You know, there used to be a central Al-Qaeda. It was found in the mountains along the Afghan-Pakistan border. It had a leadership structure. It could essentially send orders out. That's probably all ended. The Al-Qaeda spin-offs now that people worry about are Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb in northern Africa, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen. Those didn't really exist as such 12 years ago at the time of 9/11. Now they're probably the biggest overseas terrorist threat, and that's a new development.
Well, all up, it seems like the war on terror is going to be with us for a while. Jerry, thank you very much for your time.